directing some of the men to stay near the foot of the steps and make the noise of men preparing to attack. I led the rest to the stern, where we broke through into the infirmary, then stealthily climbed the steps to the galley. In the next instant we poured out onto the main deck, and sure enough the Spanish soldiers stood unaware, their backs turned and their muskets trained on the quarterdeck hatch. They were idiots. They were careless idiots, who had not only turned their backs on us, but brought muskets to a sword fight, and they paid for it with steel in their guts and across their throats, and for a moment the quarterdeck was a battlefield as we ruthlessly pressed home the advantage our surprise attack gave us, until at our feet lay dead or dying Spaniards, while the last of them threw themselves overboard in panic, and we stood and caught our breath. Though the sails were furled, the ship rocked as it was punched by another gust of wind. The hurricane would be upon us any minute. Now, on other ships along the harbour belonging to the treasure fleet, we saw soldiers handing out pikes and muskets as they began to prepare themselves for our attack. We needed a faster ship than this one, and Adewale had his eye on one, already leading a group of our men across the gangplank and to the quay. Soldiers on the harbour died by their blade. There was a crack of muskets, and some of our men fell, but already we were rushing the next galleon beside us, a beautiful-looking ship, the ship I was soon to make my own. And then we were up on it just as the sky darkened, a suitable backdrop for the battle and a terrifying augur of what was to come. Wind whipped at us, growing stronger now, hammering us in repeated gusts. The Spanish soldiers, you could see they were in disarray, as terrified of the oncoming storm as they were of the escaped prisoners, unable to avoid the onslaught of either. The battle was bloody and vicious, but over quickly, and the galleon was ours. For a moment I wondered if Adewale would want to assume command. Indeed, he had every right to do so. This man had not only set me free, but led the charge that helped win us the boat. And if he did decide to captain his own ship, I would have to respect that, find my own command, and go my own way. But no, Adewale wanted to sail with me as quartermaster. And I was more than grateful, not only that he was willing to serve under me, but that he chose not to take his skills elsewhere. In Adewale I had a loyal quartermaster, a man who would never rise up against me in mutiny, provided I was a just and fair captain. I knew that then at the beginning of our friendship, just as I know it now with all those years of comradeship between us. Ah, but the observatory. The observatory came between us. We set sail just as the masts unfurled and the first tendrils of a coming storm fattened our sails. Crosswinds battered us as we left the harbour, and I glanced behind from my place at the tiller to see the remaining ships of the treasure fleet being assaulted by wind and rain. At first their masts swung crazily from side to side, like out-of-control pendulums. Then they were clashing as the storm hit. Without ready sails, they were sitting ducks, and it gladdened my heart to see them knocked into matchwood by the oncoming hurricane. Now the air seemed to grow colder and colder around us. Above I saw clouds gathering, scudding fast across the sky and blocking out the sun. Next we were lashed with wind and rain and sea spray. Around us the waves seemed to grow and grow, towering mountains of water with foaming peaks, every one of them about to drown us, tossing us from one huge canyon of sea to another. The poultry were washed overboard. Men hung on to cabin doors. I heard screams as unlucky deckhands were snatched off the ship. The galley fire was extinguished, all hatches and cabin doors battened down. Only the bravest and most skilful men dared scale the ratlines to try to manage the canvas. The foremast snapped, and I feared for the mainmast and the mizzen, but they held, thank God, and I gave silent praise for this fast, plucky ship that had been brought to us by fate. The sky was a patchwork of black cloud that every now and then parted to allow rays of sunshine through, as if the sun was being kept prisoner behind them, as though the weather was taunting us. Still we kept going, with 3 men at the tiller and men hanging on to the rigging, as though trying to fly a huge, abominable kite, desperately trying to keep us ahead of the storm. To slow down would be to surrender to it. To surrender to it would be to die. But we didn't die. Not that day. Behind us the rest of the treasure fleet was smashed at port. But the one ship, just the one ship containing the freed prisoners, managed to escape, and the men we had, a skeleton crew, pledged their allegiance to myself and Adewale, and agreed with my proposal that we set sail immediately for Nassau. At last I was going back to Nassau to see Edward and Benjamin and rejoin the republic of pirates I had missed so much. I was looking forward to showing them my ship, my new ship. I had christened it the Jackdaw. 33. September 1715. You've named your new brig after a poxy bird? Any other man and I would have drawn my pistol, or perhaps engaged my hidden blade and made him eat his words. But this was Edward Thatch. Not Blackbeard yet, oh no. He had yet to grow the face fur which would give him his more famous moniker, but he still had all that braggadocio that was as much his trademark as the plaited beard and the lit fuses he would wear in it. Benjamin was there too. He sat with Edward beneath the sailcloth awnings of the Old Avery, a tavern on the hill overlooking the harbour, one of my very favourite places in the world, and my first port of call on entering Nassau. And Nassau, I was pleased to see, had hardly changed. A stretch of purest blue ocean across the harbour, the captured ships that littered the shores, English flags flying from their masts, the palms, the shanty houses, the huge Fort Nassau that towered above us, its death's head flag flapping in the easterly breeze. I'll tell a lie, it had changed. It was busier than it had been before. Some 900 men and women now made it their base, I discovered. 700 of them pirates. And that included Edward and Benjamin, planning raids and drinking and planning raids, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Nearby was another pirate I recognised as James Kidd, who some said was the son of William Kidd, who sat by himself. But for now my attention went to my old shipmates, who both rose to greet me. Here there were none of the formalities, the insistence on politeness and decorum that shackles the rest of society. No, I was given a proper pirate greeting, embraced in huge hugs by Benjamin and Edward, the pirate scourges of the Bahamas, but really soft old bears, with grateful tears in their eyes to see an old friend. By God, you're a sight for salty eyes, said Benjamin. Come you in and have a drink. Edward gave Adewale a look. Ahoy, Kenway! Who's this? Adewale, the Jackdaw's quartermaster. And that was when Edward made his crack about the Jackdaw's name. Neither of them had yet made mention of the robes I wore, but perhaps I had that pleasure to come. Certainly there was a moment, after the greeting, when they both gave me long, hard looks, and I wondered whether those looks were as much to gawp at my clothes as to see the change in me. Because the fact was that I'd been but a boy when I first met them, but I'd grown from a feckless, arrogant teenager, an errant son, a lovelorn but unreliable husband, into something else. A man scarred and made hard by battle, who was not quite so careless with his feelings, not so liberal with his emotions, a cold man in many respects, a man whose true passions were buried deep. Perhaps they saw that, my two old friends. Perhaps they took note of that hardening of boy to man. I was looking for men to crew my ship, I told them. Well, said Edward, there's scores of capable men about, but use caution. A shipload of the King's sailors showed up a fortnight back, causing trouble and knocking about like they own the place. I didn't like the sound of that. Was it Woodes Rogers' work? Had he sent out an advance party? Or was there another explanation? The Templars. Looking for me, maybe. Looking for something else. The stakes were high now, I should know. I'd done more than my fair share to increase them. As it turned out, in recruiting more men for my ship, I was to learn a little more about the presence of the English in the Bahamas. Men that Adewale and I spoke to talked of seeing soldiers prancing around in the King's colours. The British wanted us out. Well, of course they did. We were a thorn in His Majesty's side, a dirty great stain on the red ensign. But it felt as though there was, if anything, an increase in British interest. So it was that when I next met Edward, Ben, and, joining us, James Kidd in the Old Avery, I was extra wary of unfamiliar faces, and sure to speak out of earshot. "Have you ever heard of a place called the Observatory?" I asked them. I'd been thinking about it a lot. At its mention there was a flicker in James Kidd's eyes. I shot him a glance. He was young, about 19 or 20 years old, I'd say, so a bit younger than I was, and just like me, a bit of a hothead. So as Thatch and Hornigold shook their heads, it was he who spoke up. "Aye," he said. "I've heard of the Observatory, an old legend like El Dorado or the Fountain of Youth." I ushered them to a table where, with a look left and right, a check to see if any of the King's spies were in residence, I smoothed out the picture purloined from Torres's mansion and placed it on the table. A bit dog-eared, but still, there in front of us was an image of the observatory, and all three men looked at it with interest. Some with more interest than others. Some who pretended they were less interested than they really were. "What have you heard?" I asked James. "It's meant to be a temple or a tomb, hiding a treasure of some kind." "Ah, rocks!" bellowed Edward. "It's fairy stories you prefer to gold, is it?" Edward. He'd have no part in trying to find the observatory. I knew that from the start. Hell, I'd known that before I'd even opened my mouth. He wanted treasure he could weigh on scales, chests filled with pieces of 8, rusted with the blood of their previous owners. "It's worth more than gold, Thatch. 10,000 times above what we could pull off any Spanish ship." Ben was looking doubtful too. Matter of fact, the only ear I seemed to have belonged to James Kidd. "Robbing the king to pay his paupers is how we earn our keep here, lad," said Ben, with an admonishing tone. He jabbed a grimy, weather-beaten finger at my stolen picture. "That ain't a fortune. It's a fantasy. But this is a prize that could set us up for life." My 2 old shipmates, they were salt of the earth, the 2 very best men I'd ever sailed with, but I cursed their lack of vision. They spoke of 2 or 3 scores to set us up for months, but I had in mind a prize that would set us up for life, not to mention making me a gentleman, a man of property and promise. "Are you still dreaming on that strumpet back in Bristol?" jeered Ben when I mentioned Caroline. "Jesus, let go, lad. Nassau's the place to be, not England." And for a while I tried to convince myself that it was true, and that they were right, and that I should set my sights on more tangible treasures. During days spent drinking, planning raids, then carrying out those raids, drinking to their success, and planning more raids, I had plenty of time to reflect on the irony of it all, how standing around a table with my Templar friends, I'd thought them deluded and silly and yearned for my pirate mates with their straight-talking and free-thinking. Yet here on Nassau, I found men who had closed their minds despite appearances to the contrary, despite what they said, and even the symbolism of the black flag, with which I was presented one afternoon when the sun beat down on us. "We fly no colours out here, but praise the lack of them," said Edward, as we looked out towards the jackdaw, where Adewale stood by the flagpole. "So let the black flag signal nothing but your allegiance to man's natural freedoms. This one is yours. Fly it proud." The flag flapped gently in the wind, and I was proud. I was proud. I was proud of what it represented, and of my part in it. I had helped build something worthwhile, struck a blow for freedom, true freedom. And yet there was still a hole deep in my heart where I thought of Caroline, and of the wrong that had been done to me. You see, my sweet, I'd returned to Nassau a different man. Those passions buried deep. I was waiting for the day to act upon them. In the meantime, there were other things to think about, specifically the threat to our way of life. One night found us sitting around a campfire on the beach, our ships, the Benjamin and the Jackdaw, moored offshore. "Here's to a pirate republic, lads," said Thatch. "We are prosperous and free, and out of the reach of the king's clergy and debt collectors." Near 500 men now pledged their allegiance to the Brethren of the Coast in Nassau. "Not a bad number," said James Kidd. He cast me a brief sideways glance I pretended not to notice. "True," burped Thatch. "Yet we lack sturdy defences. If the king were to attack the town, he'd trample us." I grasped a bottle of rum he handed to me, held it up to the moonlight to examine it for bits of floating sediment, and then, satisfied, took a swig. "Then let us find the observatory," I offered. "If it does what these Templars claim, we'll be unbeatable." Edward sighed and reached for the bottle. They'd heard this from me a lot. "Not that twaddle again, Kenway. That's a story for schoolboys. I mean proper defences. Steal a galleon, shift all the guns to one side. It will make a nice ornament for one of our harbours." Now Adewale spoke up. "It will not be easy to steal a full Spanish galleon." His voice was slow, clear, thoughtful. "Have you one in mind?" "I do, sir," retorted Thatch drunkenly, "and I'll show you. She's a fussock, she is, fat and slow." Which was how we came to be launching an attack on the Spanish galleon. Not that I knew it then, of course, but I was about to run into my old friends, the Templars, again. 34. March 1716. We set course southeast or thereabouts. Edward said he'd seen this particular galleon lurking around the lower reaches of the Bahamas. We took the Jackdaw, and as we sailed we found ourselves talking to James Kidd and quizzing him on his parentage. "The bastard son of the late William Kidd, eh?" Edward Thatch was most amused to relate. "Is that a true yarn you like spinning?" The three of us stood on the poop deck and shared a spyglass like it was a blackjack of rum, trading it in order to peer through a wall of early evening fog so thick it was like trying to stare through milk. "So my mother told me," replied Kidd primly. "I'm the result of a night of passion just before William left London." It was difficult to tell from his voice if he was vexed by the question. He was different like that. Edward Thatch, for example, wore his heart on his sleeve. He'd be angry one second, cheerful the next. Didn't matter whether he was throwing punches or doling out drunken, rib-crushing bear hugs. He knew what you were getting with Edward. Whatever cards Kidd was holding, he kept them close to his chest. I remembered a conversation we'd had a while back. "Did you steal that costume from a dandy in Havana?" he'd asked me. "No, sir," I replied. "Found this on a corpse. One that was walking about and talking shite to my face only moments before." "Ah," he'd said, and a look had crossed his face. Impossible to decipher. Still, there was no hiding his enthusiasm when we finally saw the galleon we were looking for. "That ship's a monster. Look at the size of her," said Kidd, as Edward preened himself as though to say, "I told you so." "Aye," he warned, "and we cannot last long face to face with her. You hear that, Kenway? Keep your distance and we'll strike when fortune favours us." "Under cover of darkness, most likely," I said, with my eye to the spyglass. Thatch was right. She was a beauty. A fine ornament for our harbour indeed, and an imposing line of defence in its own right. We let the galleon draw away towards a disruption of horizon in the distance that I took to be an island. In Agua Island, if my memory of the charts was correct, where a cove provided the perfect place for our vessels to moor, and the abundant plant and animal life made it ideal for restocking supplies. Edward confirmed it. I know the place, a natural stronghold used by a French captain named Ducasse. Julian Ducasse, I said, unable to keep the surprise out of my voice. The Templar. Name's right, replied Edward, distracted. I didn't know he had a title. Grimly, I said, I know the man, and if he sees my ship he'll know it from his time in Havana, meaning he may wonder who's sailing her now. I can't risk that. And I don't want to lose that galleon, said Edward. Let's think on it, and maybe wait till it's darker before hopping aboard. Later I took the opportunity to address the men, climbing the rigging and gazing down upon them gathered on the main deck, Edward Thatch and James Kidd among them. I wondered as I hung there for a moment, waiting for silence to fall, whether Edward looked at me and felt proud of his young protégé, a man he had mentored in the ways of piracy. I hoped so. Gentlemen, as is custom among our kind, we do not plunge headlong into folly on the orders of a single madman, but act according to our own collective madness. They roared with laughter. The object of our attention is a square-rigged galleon, and we want her for the advantage she shall bring Nassau. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of storming this cove and taking the ship, stomp and shout, aye! The men roared their approval, not a single voice of dissent among them, and it gladdened the heart to hear it. And those who oppose, whimper nay. There was not a nay to be heard. Never was the King's Council this unified, I roared, and the men joined in, and I looked down at James Kidd and especially at Edward Thatch, and they beamed their approval. Shortly after, as we sailed into the cove, I had a thought. I needed to be sure that Julian Ducasse was taken care of. If he saw the jackdaw, and more to the point, if he saw me and then escaped, he could tell his Templar confederates where I was. And I didn't want that. Not if I still held out hope of locating the observatory, which, despite what my pals were saying, I did. I gave the matter some thought, mulling over the various possibilities, and in the end decided to do what had to be done. I jumped overboard. Well, not straight away, I didn't. First I told Edward and James of my plans, and then, when my friends had been told that I planned to go on ahead and surprise Ducasse before the main attack started, I jumped overboard. I swam to shore, where I moved like a wraith in the night, thinking of Duncan Walpole as I did it, my mind going back to the evening I'd broken into Torres's mansion, and dearly hoping that tonight didn't turn out the same way. I passed clusters of Ducasse's guards, my limited Spanish picking up snippets of conversation as they moaned about having to hunt down supplies for the boat. Night was falling by the time I came to an encampment and crouched in the undergrowth, where I listened to a conversation from within the canvas of a lean-to. One voice I recognized in particular, Julian Ducasse. I already knew Ducasse kept a manor house on the island, where he no doubt liked to relax after returning from his endeavours to control the world. The fact that he wasn't returning there now meant that this was but a fleeting visit to collect supplies. Now just one problem. Inside the lean-to, my former Templar associate was surrounded by guards. They were truculent, probably uncooperative guards, who were hacked off at having to collect stocks for the ship, not to mention feeling the sharp edge of Julian Ducasse's tongue. But they were guards all the same. I looked around at the encampment. On the opposite side was a fire that had burned down almost to the embers. Close to me were crates and barrels, and looking from them to the fire I could see that they had been placed there deliberately. Sure enough, when I crabbed over and had a better look, what I saw were kegs of gunpowder. I reached behind my neck where I'd stowed my pistol to keep it dry. My powder was wet, of course, but access to powder was no longer a problem. In the middle of the encampment stood 3 soldiers, on guard supposedly, but in actual fact mumbling something I couldn't hear. Cursing Ducasse, probably. Other troops were coming and going and adding to the pile of supplies, firewood mainly, kindling, as well as scuttlebutts that slopped with water drawn from a watering hole nearby. Not exactly the feast of wild boar and fresh spring water Ducasse was hoping for, I'd wager. Staying in the shadows, and with one eye on the movement of the troops, I crept close to the kegs and gouged a hole in the bottom one, big enough to fill my hands with gunpowder, and create a little trail as I crept round the edge of the compound, until I was as close to the fire as I dared. My line of gunpowder led in a half-circle from where I crouched back to the kegs. At the other side of that circle was the lean-to, where Julian Ducasse sat, drinking and dreaming of grand Templar plans to take over the world, and shouting abuse at his recalcitrant men. Right. I had fire. I had a trail of gunpowder leading from the fire through the undergrowth and to the kegs. I had men waiting to be blown up, and I had Julian Ducasse awaiting our moment of reckoning. Now all I needed to do was time things so that none of the clod-hopping troops would see my makeshift fuse before it could detonate the powder. Crouching, I moved to the fire, then flicked a glowing ember onto the tail of the gunpowder fuse. I steeled myself for the sound it made. It seemed so loud in the night, and thank God the soldiers were making so much noise. And then, as the fuse fizzed away from me, I hoped I hadn't inadvertently broken the line of the fuse. Hoped I hadn't accidentally trickled the gunpowder into anything wet. Hoped none of the soldiers would arrive back just at the very instant that... And then one did. He carried a bowl full of something. Fruit, perhaps. But either the smell or the noise alerted him, and he stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked down at his boots just as the sizzle burn of gunpowder trail ran past his feet. He looked up, and his mouth formed an O to shout for help, as I snatched a dagger out of my belt, pulled my arm back and threw it. I was grateful once again for those wasted afternoons vandalizing trees back home at Bristol, and thanked God as the knife hit him somewhere just above the collarbone. Not an especially accurate shot, but it did the job. So instead of shouting the alarm, he made a muted, strangulated sound, and slumped forward to his knees with his hands scrabbling at his neck. The men in the clearing heard the noise of his body falling, his bowl of fruit tumbling, the fruit rolling, and turned to see its source. All of a sudden they were alert, but it didn't matter, because even as they pulled their muskets from their shoulders and a shout went up, they had no idea what was about to happen. I don't suppose they knew what hit them. I turned my back, put my hands over my ears, and curled up into a ball as the explosion tore across the clearing. Something hit my back, something that was soft and wet, which I didn't particularly want to think about. From further away I heard shouts, and knew there would be more men arriving at any moment, so I turned and ran into the clearing, past blown-up bodies of soldiers in various states of mutilation and dismemberment, most of them dead, one of them pleading for death, and through thick black smoke that filled the clearing, embers floating in the air. Ducasse emerged from the tent, swearing in French, shouting for someone, anyone, to put out the fire. Coughing, spluttering, he waved his hand in front of his face to clear smoke and choking particles of flaming soot, and peered into the fog. And standing in front of him, he saw me. And I know that he recognized me, because he said so. "You!" was the only word he said before I drove my blade into him. My blade hadn't made a sound. You remember the gift you gave me?" It made a slight sucking noise as I pulled it from his chest. "Well, it answers just fine." "You son of a whore!" He coughed, and blood speckled his face. Around us rained a flaming shot like satanic snow. "As bold as a musket ball and still half as sharp," he managed, as the life drained from him. "I'm sorry about this, mate, but I can't risk you telling your Templar friends about me still kicking around." "I pity you, Buccaneer. After all you have seen, after all we showed you of our order, still you embrace the life of an ignorant and aimless rogue." Round his neck I saw something I hadn't seen before. A key on a chain. I yanked it and it came away easily in my fingers. "Is petty larceny the extent of your ambition?" he mocked. "Have you no mind to comprehend the scope of ours? All the empires on earth, abolished. A free and open world without parasites like you." He closed his eyes, dying. His last words were, "May the hell you find be of your own making." Behind me I heard men crashing into the clearing and knew it was time to leave. In the distance I could hear more shouts and the sounds of battle and knew that my shipmates had arrived, and that the cove and galleon would soon be ours, and that the night's work would soon be over. And as I disappeared into the undergrowth I thought about Ducasse's final words. "May the hell you find be of your own making." We would see about that, I thought. We would see. Part 3. 35. May 1716. It was 2 months later, and I was in Tulum on the eastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. My reason for being there? The ever-mysterious James Kidd and what he had showed me in San Inagua Island. He had been waiting, I now realise. Waiting for his moment to get me alone. After the death of Ducasse, the theft of his galleon, and the, well, let's just say, disposal of the rest of the Frenchman's men, an operation that boiled down to either join us and become a pirate or enjoy your swim, Thatch had sailed for Nassau with the Spanish galleon, taking most of the men with him. Myself, Adewale, and Kidd had remained behind with some vague idea of how we might utilise the cove. What I had in mind, of course, was relaxing on its beaches and drinking until the supplies of rum were dry, and then returning to Nassau. "Oh, you constructed the fortified harbour without me. What a shame I missed the opportunity to help." Something like that. What Kidd had in mind? Well, who could tell? At least until he approached me that day, told me he had something to show me, led me to the Mayan stones. "Odd-looking things, aren't they?" he said. He wasn't wrong. From a distance they'd looked like a collection of rubble, but up close were actually a carefully arranged formation of strangely carved blocks. "Is this what they call Mayan?" I asked him, staring at the rock closely. "Or is it Aztec?" He looked at me. He wore that same penetrating, quizzical look he always seemed to when we spoke. It made me feel uncomfortable, if I'm honest. Why did I always get the feeling he had something to say, something to tell me? Those cards he held close to his chest, there were times I wanted to wrench his hands away and look at them for myself. Some instinct, though, had told me that I'd find out in good time. That instinct would be proved right, it would turn out. "Are you good with riddles, Edward?" he asked me. "Puzzles and ponderings and the like?" "I'm no worse than the next man," I said carefully. "Why?" "I think you have a natural gift for it. I've sensed it for some time in the way you work and think, the way you understand the world." Now we were getting to it. "I'm not so sure about that. You're talking in riddles now, and I don't understand a word. He nodded. Whatever he had to tell me, it wasn't going to appear all at once. Clamber on top of this thing here, will you? Help me solve something. Together we scrambled to the top of the rocks, where we crouched. When James put a hand to my leg, I looked down at it. Just as tanned, weathered and worn as that of any pirate, with the same lattice-work of tiny cuts and scars earned at sea. But smaller, the fingers slightly tapered, and I wondered what it was doing there. But no, surely not. And now he was speaking, and he sounded more serious than before, like a holy man in contemplation. Concentrate and focus all your senses. Look past shadow and sound, deep into matter, until you see and hear a kind of shimmering. What was he going on about? His hand gripped my leg harder. He urged me to concentrate, to focus. His grip, in fact his whole manner, brooked no disbelief, banishing my reluctance, my resistance. And then I saw it. No, I didn't see it. How can I explain this? I felt it with my eyes. Shimmering, I said quietly. It was in the air around me, all around me, a more vivid version of something I had experienced before, sitting in a farmyard at home in Haverton late at night, when in a dream, my mind roaming free, it was as if the world had suddenly become that bit brighter and more clear. I'd been able to hear things with extra clarity, see things ahead I hadn't been able to see before. And here was the funny thing, as though there was contained within me a huge bank, a huge vault of knowledge awaiting my access, and all I needed to open it was the key. And that was it, sitting there with Kid's hand gripping my leg. It was as though I had found the key. I knew why I'd felt different all those years ago. You understand, hissed Kid. I think so. I've seen its light before, glowing like moonlight on the ocean. It's like using every sense at once to see sounds and hear shapes. Quite a combination. Every man and woman on earth has in them a kind of intuition hidden away, Kid was saying as I gazed about myself, like a man suddenly transported to another world. A blind man who could suddenly see. I've had this sense most of my life, I told him. Only I thought it related in some way to my dreaming or the like. Most never find it, said Kid. Others it takes years to tease out. But for a rare few it comes as natural as breathing. What you feel is the light of life, of living things past and present, the residue of vitality come and gone. Practice, intuition. Any man's senses can be tuned well past what he is born with, if he tries. After that we'd parted with arrangements to meet in Tulum, which is why I found myself standing in the baking heat trying to talk to a native woman who stood by what looked like a pigeon coop and who squinted up at me when I arrived. You keep these things as pets? I asked. Messengers, she replied in faltering English. This is how we communicate between these islands, how we share information and contracts. Contracts? I asked, thinking, assassins. Assassin's contracts? She told me Kid was waiting for me at a temple, and I moved on. How did she know? And why, as I walked, did I get the feeling that they were awaiting my arrival? Why, as I passed through a village made up mainly of low huts, did I feel as though the villagers were all talking about me, gaping blankly at me when I looked their way? Some wore colourful, flowing robes and jewellery and carried spears and sticks. Some had bare chests and wore breechcloths, were daubed with markings and wore strange adornments, bracelets made of silver and gold, and beaded necklaces with bones for pendants. I wondered if they were like the people from my world, bound by notions of rank and social class. And just as back in England a high-class gentleman might be recognised by the cut of his clothes and quality of his walking cane, here those at the top of the scale simply wore finer robes, more ornate jewellery, and had more intricate daubing. Perhaps Nassau really was the only place that was truly free. Or perhaps I was fooling myself about that. And then it was as if the jungle fell away, and rising high, high above me, in a pyramid shape, was a vast, tiered Mayan temple, with huge flights of steps rising through the centre of the layers of stone. Standing, gulping in the undergrowth, I noticed the freshly cut branches and stems around me. A path had been recently cleared, and I followed it until I reached a doorway in the foot of the temple. In there. Yes, in there. I felt along its sides and with effort dragged it across until I was able to squeeze inside into what looked like an entrance chamber, but not as dark as I'd expected, as though somebody had already lit. "Captain Kenway," said a voice from the shadows. It was a voice I didn't recognise, and in the next instant my pistol was drawn as I span and peered into the dark. My new enemies had the advantage of surprise, though, and the pistol was knocked from my hand at the same moment as I was grabbed and pinned from behind. The flickering torch lit hooded, shadowy figures holding me in place, while in front of me 2 men had appeared from the shadows. One of them was James Kidd. The other, a native, hooded like the others, his face indistinct in the shadows. And for a second he simply stood and stared at me. He stared at me until I stopped struggling and cursing James Kidd, and had calmed down. And then he said, "Where is the assassin, Duncan Walpole?" I threw a glance at Kidd. With his eyes he assured me everything was all right, that I was in no danger. Why I trusted him I didn't know. He'd tricked me into this meeting after all. But I relaxed nevertheless. "Dead and buried," I said of Walpole, and I didn't see the native man in front of me bridle with anger so much as sense it. Quickly I added, "After he tried to kill me." The native gave a short, thoughtful nod. "We are not sorry to see him gone. But it is you who carried out his final betrayal. Why?" "Money was my only aim," I said impudently. He moved in closer, giving me a good look at him. A native man, he had dark hair and piercing, serious eyes within a brown, lined face adorned with paint. He was also very angry. "Money," he said tightly. "Should I find comfort in that?" "He has the sense, Mentor," said James, stepping in. The sense. That much I understood. But now this. Mentor? How was this native chief mentor to James? Mention of my sense seemed to calm the native chief, the man I would later come to know as Tabai. "James tells me you met the Templars in Havana," he said. "Did you see the man they call the Sage?" I nodded. "Would you recognize his face if you saw it again?" asked Tabai. "I reckon so," I said. He thought and then seemed to reach a decision. "I must be certain," he said, quickly, and then he and his men dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone with James, who gave me a sharp look and raised a don't-say-a-word finger before I could remonstrate with him. Instead he took a torch, grimacing at the dwindling, meagre light it provided, then bent to move into a narrow passageway that went further into the temple. There the ceiling was so low that we were almost bent double as we made our way along, both conscious of what might be lurking within this thousands of years old structure. What surprises might lie in store? Whereas in the chamber our words had echoed, now they were deadened by the walls, damp rock that seemed to crowd in on us. You walked me blind and backwards into this mess, kid. Who the bloody hell was that jester back there? He called over his shoulder. Tabai, an assassin, and my mentor. So you're all part of some daffy religion? We are assassins, and we follow a creed. But it does not command us to act or submit, only to be wise. He came out of the low tunnel into another passageway, but one that did at least let us stand upright. A creed, I said as he walked. Oh, do tell, I'd love to hear it. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. This is the world's only certainty. Everything is permitted. I like that. I like the sound of that. Thinking what I like and acting how I please. You parrot the words, Edward, but you do not understand them. I gave a short laugh. Don't get all haughty with me, kid. I followed you as a friend and you tricked me. I saved your skin bringing you here, man. These men wanted you dead for consorting with Templars. I talked them out of it. Well, cheers for that. Aye, cheers. So it's you lot them Templars have been chasing then? James Kidd chuckled. Until you came along and mucked things up, it was us chasing them. We had them running scared. But they have the upper hand now. Ah. As we kept walking along passageways, I could hear strange sounds around us. Is someone in here with us? It's possible. We're trespassing. Someone's watching us. I don't doubt it. Our words dropped like a stone, echoing around the walls of the temple. Had Kidd been in here before? He didn't say, but seemed to know how to operate the doors that we came to, then the stairways and bridges, climbing up and up until we reached the final door. Whatever's waiting at the end of this path had better be worth my time, I said, irritated. That'll depend on you, he replied mysteriously. Next thing we knew, the stones beneath our feet gave way, and we plunged to water below. 36. The way was blocked by rubble, another challenge, so we swam underwater until at last, just when I'd begun to wonder if I could hold my breath a second longer, we broke the surface of water and found ourselves in a pool at one end of another large chamber. We moved on out of this chamber and through into the next, where we came upon a bust displaying a face I recognized. Jesus, I exclaimed, that's him, the sage. But this thing must be hundreds of years old. Older still, said Kidd. He looked from me to the bust. You're certain it's him? Aye, it's the eyes that mark him. Did the Templars say why they wanted this sage? With distaste, I remembered. They drew some of his blood into a little glass cube. The cube you gave them, I recalled, but felt no guilt. Why should I? Like this one, Kidd was saying. In his hands was another vial. Yes, they meant to ask him about the observatory too, but he escaped. The vial had disappeared back into the depths of Kidd's pouch. He seemed to consider something before turning away from the bust of the sage. We finished here. We returned, finding a new set of steps through the temple's innards until we were heading towards what looked like a door. As it slid away, I saw sunlight for the first time in what felt like hours, and in the next moment was gulping down fresh air, and instead of cursing the heat of the sun, as usual, was thankful for it after the clammy cold of the temple's interior. Ahead, Kidd had stopped and was listening. He threw a look back and motioned me to hush my noise and stay out of sight. What was going on I couldn't tell, but I did as I was told, then followed him. Slowly and quietly we inched forward to where we found Artabai crouched out of sight behind a rock. Out of sight because in the distance we could hear the unmistakable cockney bray of English soldiers at work. Behind the boulder we waited in silence, and Artabai turned his penetrating stare upon me. "The statue in the temple," he whispered. "Was that the man you saw in Havana?" "Spitting likeness, aye," I whispered back. Artabai turned back to watch the soldiers over the edge of the boulder. "And it seems another sage has been found," he said to himself. "The race for the observatory begins anew." Was it wrong of me to feel a thrill? I was part of this now. "Is that why we're whispering?" I said. "This is your doing, Captain Kenway," said Artabai quietly. "The maps you sold the Templars have led them straight to us. And now the agents of 2 empires know exactly where we operate." Kidd was about to step forward to engage the soldiers. No doubt he felt more comfortable hacking down English soldiers than natives, but Artabai was already stopping him. With one hand restraining Kidd, his eyes went to me. "They have taken Edward's crew as well," he said. I started. Not the crew, not Adewale and my men. But Artabai, with a final reproachful look my way, slipped away. Behind him he'd left what was unmistakably a blowpipe that Kidd picked up. "Take this," he said, handing it to me. "You'll attract no attention and take fewer lives." And as he gave me a few tips on how to use it, I wondered, was this part of some new challenge? Or was it something new? Was I being trained, evaluated? Let them try, I thought darkly. I'm nobody's man but my own, answerable only to myself and to my conscience. Rules and baubles, not for me, thanks. They could stuff their creed where the sun don't shine as far as I was concerned. Besides, why would they even want me? This sense, perhaps? My skill in battle? Doesn't come cheap, gentlemen, I thought, as I came to the perimeter of the clearing where my crew had been deposited, sitting back to back with their hands bound. Good lads, they were giving the English soldiers all kinds of grief. "Let me up, tosspot, and face me like a soldier. If only you knew what was coming to you, I think you'd pack your kits and run." I fitted the first of my darts into the blowpipe. I could see what needed to be done. Take out the English soldiers one by one, try to even up the numbers a little. The poor unfortunate native gave me just the diversion I needed. Howling outrage, he staggered to his feet and tried to run. With him went the attention of the soldiers, grateful for the sport, gleefully fitting their muskets to their shoulders and firing. Crack! Crack! Like snapping branches in the forest. There was laughter as he crashed down in a haze of crimson, but they didn't notice that one of their number folded silently into the undergrowth too, his hand clutching at the blowpipe dart protruding from his neck. As the guards returned to the clearing, I crossed the path behind them and at the same time spat a second dart at the soldier bringing up the rear. I span on my heel and caught him as he fell, and as I dragged his body into the bush, I thanked God for my rowdy men. They had no idea of my presence, but couldn't have been more helpful if I'd primed them. A soldier swung round. "Hey," he said, his friend nowhere to be seen. "Where's Thompson?" Hidden in the undergrowth, I fitted the next dart and raised the pipe to my lips, took a quick breath and puffed out my cheeks, just as Kidd had shown me. The dart pierced him below the jawbone, and he probably thought he'd been bitten by a mosquito, right up until the second he lost consciousness. Now we were in business. From my vantage point in the bushes, I counted. 3 men dead, 6 still alive, and if I could take out a couple more before the remaining guards worked out they were being picked off, well, then I thought I could take the rest myself. Me and my hidden blade. Did this make me an assassin now? Now that I was behaving and thinking like one? After all, hadn't I pledged to fight the Templars for what happened in Hatherton? My enemy's enemy is my friend. No. I'm my own man. Answer to no one but myself. No creed for me. I'd had years of wanting to be free of convention. I wasn't about to give all that up. By now the soldiers were looking around themselves. They'd begun to wonder where their comrades were. And I realised I didn't have the luxury of picking another one off. I had to take them all out myself. 6 against 1. But I had the advantage of surprise, and as I leapt from within the undergrowth I made it my first order of business to swipe my blade across the ropes that bound Adewale. Behind me he scrambled to find a weapon of his own. My blade was in my right hand, my pistol held in my left. Positioned between 2 men, with my arms out straight, I pulled the trigger of the pistol and slashed with my right hand at the same time, bringing my arms to cross in front of me. One man died with a metal ball ploughing through his chest, the other with a gaping throat wound. I dropped the empty pistol, pivoted, snatched a new pistol from my belt, and uncrossed my arms at the same time. 2 new targets, and this time the blade's back swipe sliced open a man's chest, while I shot a 4th man in the mouth. I met a sword blow with a parry from the blade, and then a soldier came forward with bared teeth, giving me no time to snatch my 3rd pistol. For a moment we traded blows, and he was better than I had expected, better than I had dared hope he would be, because while I wasted precious seconds bettering him, his comrade was looking along the barrel of his musket at me, ready to pull the trigger. I dropped to one knee, jabbed upwards with the blade, and sliced into the swordsman's side. Dirty trick. Nasty trick. There was even something of the outraged English sense of honour in his agonised howl of anguish and pain, as his legs gave way beneath him and he came thumping to the ground, his sword swinging uselessly, and not enough to prevent my blade punching up underneath his jaw and through the roof of his mouth. A dirty trick, a nasty trick, and a stupid one. Now I was on the ground, never go down in a fight, with my blade wedged in my opponent, a sitting duck. My left hand scrabbled to find my 3rd pistol, but unless his musket misfired because the powder was wet, I was dead. I looked over to him, saw him do the about-to-fire face. A blade appeared from his chest as Adewale ran him through. I breathed a sigh of relief as he helped me up, knowing I'd been close, this close, to death. Thank you, Ade. He smiled, waved my thanks away, and together our gaze went to the soldier. His body rose and fell with his last breaths, and one hand twitched before it went still, and we wondered what might have been. 37. Not long later the men were free, and James and I stood on the beach at Tulum, a Tulum once again in the hands of natives rather than soldiers or slavers, looking out to sea. With a curse he handed me his spyglass. "Who's out there?" I asked. A huge galley cruised along the horizon, getting more and more distant with each passing second. I could just about make out men on deck, and one in particular seemed to be ordering the others around. "See that mangy old codger," he said. "He's a Dutch slaver called Lawrence Prince. Living now like a king in Jamaica. Bastard's been a target for years. Bloody hell, we nearly had him." Kid was right. This slave trader had been in Tulum, but was now well on his way to safety. He considered his mission a failure, no doubt, but at least he'd escaped with his liberty. Another assassin none too pleased was Artabai, who joined us wearing a face so serious I couldn't help but laugh. By God, you assassins are a cheery bunch, eh? All frowns and furrowed brows. He glared at me. Captain Kenway, you have remarkable skill. Ah, thanks, mate, it comes natural. He pursed his lips. But you are churlish and arrogant, prancing around in a uniform that you have not earned. Everything is permitted, I laughed. Isn't that your motto? The native man might have been old, but his body was sinewy, and he moved like a man much younger. But his face could have been carved from wood, and in his eyes was something truly dark, something both ancient and ageless. I found myself unnerved as he gave me the full benefit of his stare, and for a moment I thought he might say something, simply make me wilt in the heat of his contempt. Until at last he broke the ghastly silence. I absolve you of your errors in Havana and elsewhere, he said, but you are not welcome here. And with that he left, and in his wake James shot me a look. Sorry, mate. Wish it were otherwise, he said, and left me alone to ponder. Bloody assassins, I thought. They were just as bad as the other lot. The self-righteous, sanctimonious attitude they had. We're this, we're that. Like the priests back home who used to wait outside taverns and curse you for being a sinner and called on you to repent. Who wanted you to feel guilty all the time. But the assassins didn't burn your father's farm, did they? I thought. It was the Templars who did that. And it's the assassins who showed you how to use the sense. With a sigh, I decided I wanted to smooth things over with Kidd. I wasn't interested in the path he wanted me to take, but being asked, being considered suitable, there was something to be said for that. I found him by the same pigeon coop where I'd met the native woman earlier. There he stood, tinkering with his hidden blade. Cheery bunch of mates you've got, I offered. Though he frowned, a light in his eyes betrayed that he was pleased to see me. Nevertheless, he said, You deserve scorn, Edward, prancing about like one of us, bringing shame to our cause. What's that, your cause? He tested his blade, in and out, and then turned his eyes on me. To be blunt, we kill people. Templars and their associates. Folks who'd like to control all the empires on earth, claiming they do it in the name of peace and order. Yes, I'd come across those sort of people before. These people who wanted jurisdiction of everyone on earth. I'd broken bread with them. Sounds like Ducasse's dying words, I said. You see? It's about power, really. About lording over people. Robbing us of liberty. And that, liberty, was something I held very, very dear indeed. How long have you been one of these assassins? I asked him. Couple of years now. I met Artabai in Spanish Town, and there was something about him I trusted, a sort of wisdom. And is all of this his idea, this clan? Kidd chuckled. Oh no. The assassins and Templars have been at war for thousands of years, all over the world. The natives of this new world had similar philosophies for as long as they've been here, and when Europeans arrived, our groups sort of matched up. Cultures and religions and languages keep folks divided. But there's something in the assassin's creed that crosses all boundaries. A fondness for life and liberty. Sounds a bit like Nassau, don't it? Close, but not quite. I knew when we parted that I'd not seen the last of Kidd.
This audiobook has been broken into multiple parts to make the download faster. You have reached the end of a part, but not the end of the complete audiobook, so please check your library for the next part of this audiobook. Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.